Okay, so when we deal with lead time um, and lead time variability, a good way to view this is to look at the effects of variation uh, on our needs to cover demand. So a lot of this is going to be very obvious, so please bear with me. Obviously, when we have variation, we have, a standard deviation. The standard deviation directly relates to our service factor. And that's where the Z factor comes in. Obviously, there's a direct correlation between service factor and cost, obviously. Whereas the larger the service factor, the more inventory you have to maintain. Now, one of the questions you're going to see is it better to have reduced variation in lead time or have a lower lead time? And in general, well, I'm going to try not to answer the question for you, but if you look at how the customer service level is affected, the greater the sigma, the greater, let me just turn on my drawing here. And this is probably going to be obvious to you, the greater your standard deviation, obviously, the wider this band's going to be, and the more safety stock you're going to have in your supply chain to address that. So obviously, lower variation results in a smaller band, which results in a smaller safety stock. Okay. Or safety stock requirement. So when we deal with customer service levels, you have to look at either how not only the service level, what percent, what sigma do you want to do, 6 sigma, or do you want to do 5 sigma, or 4 sigma, or 3 sigma? But do you want to, but also how much does 1 sigma require you to have an inventory? So, and I've done this when I've arrived at a repair facility, for instance. One of the first things I do is I look at how much variation in my processes is there. How much variation is there in me getting product from my facility to the customer? Because this variation is going to determine how much inventory I need to hold in my factory to maintain that additional quote unquote service level. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. This may be pretty obvious to you, so I'm not. So when we deal with this chart here, this is a lean. This is a way of thinking it from a lean standpoint, and this is kind of like a pull strategy, but the push strategy is very similar, to be honest with you. Instead of capacity, you would just deal with inventory. So obviously, we want all of our demand to be, whoops, let me see. We want our demand to be, oops, there we go, to be either at lead time or beyond lead time. We don't want this to be below lead time. So when we deal with lead time, you obviously want to push your lead time to the left. We want to decrease the lead time so we have more people on this side of the chart. Now, look at when we look at variation in lead time, I have it here. Let's say this is a very wide sigma band, but obviously when we deal with trying to get people to the right of your lead timeline here, it's key to remember that when we place inventory in our system to address lead time, you you can't reliably focus on this line here. So when you, what the heck? Hold on, sorry. Whoops. So when you quote unquote hedge your bet, when you have to determine which lead time you can reliably maintain, you have a quote unquote customer service level within your lead time where you basically say, okay, to maintain this lead time, I got to put this much inventory worth of goods out in the system in order to absorb this additional lead time. So obviously, when we're dealing with lead time, we want to reduce the variation. Once again, I'm not going to answer the question if a lead time is if a shorter lead time or lower variability is better. That's kind of like a difference between having better predictability in your supply chain or having a more efficient supply chain. An efficient supply chain, you may be saying, yeah, I have a very low lead time, but my ability to maintain that low lead time may not be that well, which results in the high variation. And it's surprising to me, in my experience, how many times people don't even look at the variation in their lead time. They just do a quick average lead time and say, okay, that's my lead time, without even looking at the variation within it. So, so the variation is an important factor here, obviously. Okay, I'm going to, I'm going to do something real quick. Well, so next slide. Oops. Well, come on. For some reason, my computer's not playing very nice right now. There we go. So now, strategies to address variation, to address lead time and capacity. You have, you can either reduce variation. Obviously, this reduces the bands here. Okay. Either in your lead time or your capacity. This doesn't deal with inventory, but this is very similar to the inventory if you were doing a push system. Or you can actually increase your capacity, which moves your capacity line up, which makes more of these blocks underneath your capacity. Ideally, all of these bars will be your at-once customers, or your demand underneath your lead time will be below your capacity, so you'll be able to consistently provide to these customers. So now you can also decreasing lead time is also a very good idea too, because it makes more of these bars to the right of your lead time, which is what you ideally want. So as this lead time goes to the right, obviously your variation will move with it. And all factors being equal, if you have, and this is important when answering one of your questions for week 6, as your lead time shortens, the variation, all things being equal, will shorten too. That's not always true, obviously. Because, like, for instance, if you shrink lead time by just merely forcing people to work harder, your variation may decrease in the short term, but it'll increase in the long term as systems break down and people get tired, and the people that provide you the materials begin to feel stress in their own supply systems. So just keep that in mind when you answer one of the questions for week 6. Okay. So now I'm gonna cover push and pull systems. I think I may have covered this already, but I'll cover it again. So the difference between a pull system and a push system is that we deal with actual consumption rather than forecasting, which is why things like VMI is very good, because as a rule of thumb, the more you use actual consumption rather than a large demand forecast, the more accurate your supply chain will be. And there's a rule of thumb also within forecasting that you want to use the most recent data possible. But when you do, like when we cover bullwhip, that is not always true. We're going to cover bullwhip effect in week 9, I think. So we move away from forecasting to avoid some of the bullwhip effects, because demand forecasting injects a bit of possibility of the bullwhip effect. And basically, the bullwhip effect is the effects of the perception of individuals within a supply chain of demand that they see. Okay. Ideally, the best way to address bullwhip effect is to have a shared forecasting system. And even in a pull system, you have some forecasting, because you can't have exact consumption at the moment. But you use consumption rates as recent as possible for a pull system. So each link in the supply chain holds maximum expected demand with an average replenishment time. So what we basically do is we say, okay, what's the actual consumption? If it's 10 units or 12 units, that's the amount of inventory that we're going to maintain based upon our lead time. So if our lead time is 3 weeks and we expect to have 10 weeks worth of 10 weeks of consumption per week, then we're going to hold 30 units of inventory. Then we have safety stocks to address the variation. So if our variation within our expected demand is, say, plus or minus 2 units, then we're going to hold 2 units worth of safety stock in our system to absorb that variation. So each lake receives what was shipped or sold. And that's adjusted when the buffer management detects changes in demand. So as the changes in demand occur, we pull from the safety stocks. So if the demand goes up to 11, we will pull one of the safety stocks to meet that demand. Now, this is a bit of a, when we set our safety stocks, there's different calculations for how we do the safety stocks. And the book actually does a pretty good job of that. And I think on page, let's say 42, 43. And the way that it does there is pretty much the same as it does for a pull system. So as our demand changes, the variation around the demand also changes, in which case the safety stock level is updated based upon the variation and our customer service level, which is the amount of sigma that we want to absorb in our supply chain. And the key thing is pull systems focus on actual market demand and not forecasting. And this is why it's very important to have something like VMI, where everyone has the demand information at the same time. And it reduces oscillations causing that do cause over and under inventory. One of the things that I love is like oscillations in over and under inventory, because I love the sales that result from them. End of year blowouts or anything else where they sell things a lot. And one of my personal hobbies is I like to go towards the end of the year, like this time of the year, and just go through stores and see how much is on sale, because it really, to me, shows me how disciplined the supply chains are. Macy's is one of those, like Macy's in St. Louis seems to always have a huge blowout sale with a lot of inventory, which seems to tell me that Macy's has issues with understanding their demand. Now, this goes back to the question of, is a push or pull system best? And Macy's may have very low warehouse costs, and their material costs may be very low. So end of year blowouts may not be a big deal. Like as we mentioned last week, if your salvage costs are higher than your variable costs and you've already met your fixed costs, you're still making profit. I do wonder if Macy's makes a lot of profit when they have their inventory sales, because I buy lots of stuff really cheap at the end of the year there. But it's just something to think about. So that's what a pull system is. I think I've already covered this, so I'm just going to kind of whiz through this. So in a traditional push system, we put our stock as close to the retailers as possible, because that's where the variation's felt. Okay, that's where the demand is felt. Well, the problem that I'm going to go over is going to address this. But just remember that in a push system, we like to put the stock as close to the retailers as possible. Then we have a smaller stock near the production warehouse to address changes. And this is one of the things about risk pooling. Centralizing a supply chain, which is something that we're going to talk about in week 6. Centralizing a supply chain reduces the amount of safety stock you require, because if you remember the risk pooling lecture that I created, when we aggregate the demand across several different demand areas, we reduce the variation felt at the point of aggregation. So in this case, the amount of, let me see. Oh, geez. See, I decided to try to use the presentation mode, and I'm seeing now why I like to use the normal PowerPoint preview instead. So if you look at here, if we had all of these going straight to the production warehouse, the amount of stock required to maintain these two would be higher than if we just had one servicing both of these. So this is just general risk pooling concept. So centralization is more effective in a push system because it allows us to have less inventory across multiple areas. Now, it reduces flexibility. And this is why a pull system focuses on using smaller lot sizes, because the pull system is more flexible. So it allows us, with smaller lot sizes, we can address variation quicker. Now, in a pull system, our large stock is maintained near the production warehouse because we address the variation directly through smaller lot sizes. This, as I said, this is more flexible. So if for some reason this shop here suddenly had a sudden spike in sales, we'd be able to move stock, more inventory from the buffer stock to this stock here. Now, obviously, with a pull system, this isn't possible because we have larger lot sizes. But that's how it works here. So let's go ahead and clear this out here. Does this make sense? I think I already covered this, so it's not. So it shouldn't be anything new. Okay. I'm starting to hate this view. I think I'm going to get rid of it next time. Whoops. Yeah, my mouse is freaking out on me here. Hold on a minute. Let me, there we go. So, safety stock. I'm going to go, and you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and stop this here. It's driving me nuts. And get rid of my notes. There we go. Sorry, let me just resize this real quick. Okay. So I think I have already covered safety stock already, but I'm going to cover it again because week 6's problem discusses safety stock. So safety stock is stock deliberately held with the intention of meeting unpredictable demand or protecting against unreliable supply. So in general, safety stock is used to absorb variability in either our demand or in our supply. So generally, we place our safety stock near the areas of highest, where we can address the most variation in the demand or supply. And when we set safety stock, there's a nice equation that they use in 42, which is very helpful. But we have very much 3 factors that we consider. We consider the demand rate, okay, how much demand per period. Response is basically how quickly we are able to replace the stock. This deals with our lead time. So, and the replenishment lead time, how long, and replenishment lead time has 3 factors inside. Now, I tend to view these in addition to lead time. So basically, this is pretty much the whole lead time right here. So the time a unit is consumed until it is replaced in the systems. That's lead time. For the order, the production lead time is time the order completed to the time the order is produced, and transportation lead time, how much time it takes to ship the product. So in general, when I look at lead time reduction, these are kind of like 3 factors that I look at. I find it easier to understand the lead time when I break down the lead time into like these 3 elements. And I guess you could break it down into more elements, but this is a good place to start when trying to look at lead time. So moving from a decentralized to centralized distribution reduces safety stock because of risk pooling. Once again, in my experience, this isn't always true because there's, you always find outliers. A centralized distribution system has higher variation in general because the goal of a pull system is to reduce variation within it. Centralized distribution encourages large inventories because it uses warehousing and everything else. So they're more willing to accept variation in their supply chain. So in one, you trade decreased inventory due to risk pooling, whereas in a pull system, you reduce your variation to reduce your inventories. You're going to read where it says that centralized distributions have reduced need for safety stock. And that's generally true if you look at the math, but in real life, because of the goals of each of the systems, if all things being equal, that is true. Okay, but if you have a decentralized push distribution, this is true. But if you have a decentralized pull distribution, then that's not always correct, because as I said, the goals within that system are different. The goals within a decentralized pull system encourages less variation because we don't deal with demand forecasting, we deal with actual demand. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, I'm assuming it does. That or you fell asleep. So next, I think, so factors influencing safety stock placement. Just 4 general factors. Customer tolerance. I think I discussed safety stock when I dealt with the demand, the lead time versus demand charts last time. So basically, customer tolerance. How much time the customer is willing to wait. And as I said before, sometimes you get the customer to wait longer. Ideally, that's a good idea. The variable rate of demand. The potential for swings in unexpected. The potential for unexpected swings in demand. Very simple. The variable rate of supply and inventory flexibility. The first two, variable rate of demand, variable rate of supply, deals with the variation in your demand and supply, as you mentioned earlier. And the flexibility is how you place the places in your supply chain where you can leverage things to be more effective. Okay. Now, I think that's it for week 6. So I just really quick. Now, I'm just going to real quick over week 6 problem. And basically, it's going to give you a problem where you compare the amount of safety stock in 2 systems. You have one system where the lead time. First thing you have a factory, you have a cross dock, and you have a retail outlet. You have 2 retail outlets, sorry. So it says, compare the amount of safety stock in 2 systems where lead time from a cross dock to retail outlet equals 0, and where the lead time from the factory to the cross dock is 0. And it's going to say, compare the safety stock in both systems. So when we deal with this, what I always recommend for students to do is just draw this out. So if you draw it out, it's going to look like this. Okay. You have a manufacturing facility, a cross-dock facility, and 2 retail outlets. In this example, we just, you can view this as a normal warehouse or whatever. The difference obviously is in a cross-dock, there's no shipment time, lead time. Okay, there's no transportation lead time because cross-dock, the materials immediately are shipped out of a cross-dock. That's the only difference. But for this example, usually I say, look, just we can view this as the same as a warehouse for ease of simplification. So in the first example, it says, so basically total lead time is L1 plus L2. So if it takes us 3 weeks to go from manufacturing facility to cross dock, and 3 weeks go from cross dock to the retail outlet, then it's a total of 6. So they're saying, think about if the time to go from the cross dock to the retail outlet is 0. Okay, basically you've positioned the cross docks basically right next to your retail outlets. Okay, so if this is the case, then L2 will be 0. So in this case, I just use number 6. So obviously all the lead time will be located at L1. And if you look at where the lead time from the manufacturing facility to the cross dock is 0, then all of your lead time is at your retail outlets. So where would you put your safety stock? I'm not going to answer the question for you, but just remember that safety stock goes where the most variation is felt. So which of these locations would have more variation? The one where there's no demand, I'm sorry, where there's no lead time, or where there is all the lead time exists. Now, one thing that they don't cover in the problem is the variation in demand. If you want to address the variation in demand in your question, in your answer, that's great. I'd love to see it. But if you want, you can only just deal with the variables that are given to you. Okay. So remember from when I was earlier, talking earlier, the safety stock is placed to absorb variation, which basically to address our customer service level. So which of these locations, based upon the lead time location, would have the highest effect on the customer service level? So are there any questions overall? Okay, I'm gonna assume not. So if there's any questions, please feel free to post them in the class, and I will address them. So quick close. I'm going to be going over the week 5, the group term project progress reports, probably soon after the first of the year. I'm going to give all the groups the ability to post and updates. I haven't gotten them from all the groups yet. So if you haven't seen anything from me regarding to your groups term paper progress, then have no fear. You should see something soon after January 2nd. And all right, I think that's it. So unless there's anything else, I am going to log off.